I'm recording. Thank you. I will make you host back or my host. Here you go.
Okay. Thank you again, Vladimir. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I hope that what I'm going to speak to you about this morning is of interest, and I'm very ready to have an interactive discussion with the participants on the renovation wave strategy of the European Union and on how this is a real opportunity for economic recovery as we emerge from the global pandemic in the months and years ahead. I've prepared a number of slides, and I'm happy after the webinar for the organizers to share with participants or to post on their own website the presentation. And I'm going to start just with the classic introduction of my credentials for speaking. As Vladimir said, I am the director of the Renovate Europe campaign, which is a political communications campaign at EU level. It's a campaign that's been underway, as you see here, since 2011, and we're happy to have 45 partners that are supporting our work, both financially and in terms of sharing their networks and their own advocacy strategies with us. And among those, we have 17 national partners, including the Slovenian construction cluster, and absolutely delighted to be speaking in the context of the national efforts going on in Slovenia and indeed in Central and Eastern European countries. On top of having official partners, we also have what we call champions that are supporting our work, and they come from politics, both European Parliament and national parliaments, from businesses, financial services industries, and from communities or city networks. And it just so happens that today, as I speak to you, we also have 45 champions, though the numbers are going to increase rapidly in the months ahead as we build momentum towards revisions to European legislation next year. So what are the objectives of the Renovate Europe campaign? Our ambition is to reduce the energy demand of the building stock in the EU by 80% by 2050. And this is necessary in order to ensure that we achieve the objectives of the European Union in terms of climate and energy. Indeed, the Buildings Directive asks that all member states have a long-term renovation strategy in place that will lead to the building stock being highly energy efficient and decarbonized by 2050. And that's a very big challenge. That challenge is illustrated by the two graphs you see on the left of the screen. Here at the top, we see the distribution of the building stock in the EU by energy performance certificate rating, a study carried out by the Building Performance Institute Europe in 2018 that showed that only 3% of stock in the EU has a Class A rating, which is far too low a number of buildings. And as you see, it varies dramatically across countries. We have Bulgaria at the far left, where almost all buildings are F or G rated. And maybe the best performing one in this is possibly Ireland, my own home country, where only around 25% are in the F or G rating. So you see the level of the challenge that we face. So in order to face that challenge, we have been stating that we need to increase the rate of energy renovation to 3% per year, and to make sure that all of those renovations are indeed deep energy renovations, capturing the full potential of the building stock. And the work we do is to target policy and decision makers at European level and through our national partners to the national governments as well. I see new participants are arriving, so welcome to join us. I'm admitting them, Vladimir, as they appear on the screen. So the second graph at the bottom is really more telling, because a very important study was carried out for the European Commission and presented in December 2019, just 1 year ago, where they examined, and it was Navigant, based in Germany, that carried out the work for the European Commission. They examined what is the rate, the real rate of energy renovation in the European Union. And in defining what they mean by deep renovation, they defined that renovations delivering between 3 and 29% savings are shallow, that renovations delivering between 30 and 59% savings are medium, and only those above 60% and above are deep renovations, which is the category that we're interested in. That deep energy renovation rate does not meet 0.2% of the building stock per year. So that really clearly demonstrates the level of the challenge we face. So among the actions that we take as a communications campaign is we hold major events each year. And this year's Renovate Europe Day events saw 6 national events being organized in conjunction or around the same time as our Brussels focused event took place. They were all online this year due to the COVID crisis. And indeed, the Slovenian national partner organized a very interesting event at which I was honored to be an introductory speaker. And today I wish to deep dive more into the topics we discussed. But we were very proud and pleased that Frans Timmermans, who's the first executive vice president of the European Commission, took 30 minutes of his time to be with us live online, to be interviewed by our champion Peter Sweetman, one of the leading thinkers on financing energy efficiency in Europe, and by our vice chair Brooke Riley from the Rockwool Group. That interview really showed, and it's available now on our website, showed that the European Commission has finally understood that the renovation of buildings can be a real driver for economic prosperity and for recovery from the economic impacts of the COVID crisis. And indeed, not only that, we face very challenging times as a society. Looking at the 3 key things that come to my mind, the climate change impacts are more and more evident. And we're seeing that not just here in Europe, but across the globe. As we speak today, the coastline of the east of the Australian continent is being washed away by unprecedented storms caused by the El Niño effect. An effect that's been well known for decades, but is now much more intense than it used to be previously. The public health crisis and the pandemic that has confined us all to our homes, and I think many of us are sitting at home even today, nearly 1 year on since the COVID crisis struck and the coronavirus began to infect the human population, and the subsequent crisis in our economies. And I think somehow we've managed to be shielded from that to date, but I believe once the society begins to function normally again, we're going to see ongoing impacts across many levels of society. And reactions within civil society are really important to be aware of. The Fridays for Future movement and other youth movements for climate have been acknowledged by the European President, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to have been a main motivator for writing the European Green Deal. So it was a demonstration to me as a campaigner that if we do speak up and if we do organize and if we do transmit our messages responsibly, we can be heard. It doesn't happen every time. But the reaction to the COVID crisis of being confined to our homes, I think, has brought into sharp relief the quality of our homes, the flexibility of the spaces in our homes, the comfort levels that we have. And I'm hopeful that it's going to lead to a desire for more demand for renovation of our homes moving forward. And happily, governments have stepped up their efforts and introduced recovery programs. I don't think it's the case across every country in the EU, but many governments have brought forward recovery programs that are promising at least. And I will come back to that because the European Union has introduced the Next Generation EU initiative, which has within it the Recovery and Resilience Facility amounting to nearly 700 billion euro. And that money is something that I will point out to you how it can be accessed in the months and years ahead. So those policy developments are captured at the bottom of the slide. We have the European Green Deal mentioned by Vladimir in his introduction, where the renovation flagship exists, and that led to the strategy being published. And I've just mentioned the Next Generation EU initiative and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So the question is, what is the renovation wave strategy? What has the European Commission set out? And when I've made this presentation previously, I've used and borrowed the slides from the European Commission because it allows me to be sure I'm saying exactly what's intended in the document. But I will overlay comments of our reactions as I present the Commission's own slides on this topic. So the renovation wave strategy should probably be thought of more of a statement of intent rather than a series of policy or regulatory proposals. But the intent is to reduce emissions by at least, and this is overall emissions, by at least 55% in 2030. And please note that last Thursday night, all of our heads of state sat up all night long negotiating and adopted the at least 55% greenhouse gas reduction target for 2030. And that's all 27 member states. It was a unanimous decision. So the contribution to that the Commission sees is deep energy renovation of at least 35 million buildings by 2030. They've finally come to realize and accept that 85 to 95% of the buildings in the EU that are standing and today will still be standing and occupied in 2050. So without renovating those buildings, we don't achieve our climate targets. And an interesting aspect in the renovation wave is what's called the new European Bauhaus, which is intended to match style and sustainability. And here the Commission are speaking to the wishes for more responsibility towards natural resources and the resources of the planet as a whole. But they're also speaking out saying it's not adequate to just have technologies that are clipped onto buildings in an ugly way. They must be done in a way that is going to create contentment and desire among people for their buildings to be touched. And of course, as an architect and having practiced for 17 years, I'm very sensitive to that. I think it's a very good initiative as well. So the three key priorities in the renovation wave are to tackle energy poverty and worst performing buildings first. So a social dimension with which we agree. And indeed, by tackling worst performing buildings, you should be getting bigger gains in terms of reducing energy demand quicker. Because if you're touching buildings that are already quite good, the delta of improvement is not so great. Secondly, renovation of public buildings, something we've been calling for a long time, that public buildings would be front runners, allowing our industries and our sector to get down the learning curve and gain economies of scale more quickly. So buildings like schools, hospitals, and public administrations to be captured and to be addressed first. And we really do support this because we feel that by leading by example, we will encourage more of private sector owners to come on board. And finally, third priority, decarbonization of heating and cooling. And that's the wing of the strategy that will look at how do you integrate renewables and renewable energy sources more completely into buildings, and something we can come back to. Because, for example, when you have, excuse me, just letting more people in, when you wish to maybe electrify through heat pumps the supply to buildings, that must only be done when the building is already energy efficient, because otherwise you will risk, for example, having a higher energy bill if your fabric remains poor quality. So the actual elements more specifically that the Renovation Wave strategy hopes to achieve is to boost recovery and reduce energy poverty. So I don't want on the second item where the Commission estimate that there will be the creation of 160,000 green jobs in the construction sector by 2030. Now, we've taken issue with this number. We think it's wrong by a factor of 10. So we believe that the Renovation Wave should be able to create about 1.6 million jobs in the construction sector by 2030. And the Commission, in their response to our formal objection to the numbers, say that they are highlighting that these are green jobs. So I'm not sure where I see the distinction there. And secondly, that it's the most conservative possible number, and they didn't want to raise hopes too highly. But I think that's a bad tactic, and the number is going to be several factors greater than this number of 160,000 jobs. And what we like to point out is that jobs in the construction sector are local jobs because the buildings are local. And in the construction sector, they go from white collar workers in the design professions and in financial sector and planning through the phase on the site with the construction work taking place and on to the maintenance phase and the operational life of the building, where other monitoring jobs and maintenance jobs are there throughout the lifetime of the building. So it's not just construction jobs where people think of hard hats and muddy boots. It's all types of jobs that are going to be stimulated. And with the fifth bullet point here, where decarbonization and digitalization of the sector are also being promoted, we will open doors towards having more younger, more female workers attracted into the sector if we can make the image much more modern and digitalized. And indeed, that shift in the way the construction sector is organized is already underway. So moving on, the strategy hopes to break down barriers to renovation, barriers that have existed for a long period of time. And they hope to do that by providing better and more reliable information, incentives, and legal certainty for owners and tenants, and that through technical assistance, project development assistance, and one-stop shops. Financing, not only through the existing EU budgets, but also through the Next Generation EU recovery budget and leveraging private finance. And I'll come back to that point a little later. They wish to increase capacity among public authorities, again through technical assistance and more training for workers. There's a skills pact about to be announced by the European Commission. They intend to push market development for sustainable construction products by changing the construction products regulation, and more bio-based materials are becoming more discussed in the European and Brussels-based sectors. And they want to look towards neighborhood-based or community-led approaches to move away from the individual one-by-one building approach and try and have dynamics about district-level approaches. How can you take a group of buildings and gain synergies and economies of scale by doing renovation across a district at one time? So we are very happy with many of these elements because many of the priorities we've been asking for nearly 10 years find in EU level documentation and regulations. But the real work starts in the year ahead. And that's what I wanted to just quickly talk to you about. Is there's going to be a number of revisions to European directives in the year ahead. We're going to see changes to the Buildings Directive, where the energy performance certificates methodology will change. We're going to see the phased introduction of mandatory minimum energy performance standards for all types of buildings. And then member states will have to define the phasing over time. And there will be revisions to the requirements on energy audits in the Energy Efficiency Directive There will also be revisions in the Energy Efficiency Directive on public buildings and the requirements for member states. And finally, on this slide, you see that the Commission intend to bring a proposal in 2023 on building renovation passports by introducing a single digital place where there's going to be one tool, a digital building logbook that unifies the energy performance certificate, the building renovation passport, the renovation roadmap, the smart readiness indicator, all in one digital place. And actually that will be a great boost for moving forward. But our critical appraisal of the strategy is that there are implications in these headline objectives, which in the strategy say, for the building sector, by 2030, we're going to have a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to see a 14% reduction in final energy consumption of the building stock, and an 18% reduction in energy demand for heating and cooling. So behind these figures, and that methodology is not yet exposed to us by the European Commission, but behind these figures is actually, when you look at it, a big push towards greening the supply rather than reducing the energy demand in the building stock. So come back to the number, and I'm sorry to be a little technical or geeky here, but if you have 35 million buildings renovated, deep renovated by 2030, that means that you're touching 1/6 of the building stock, because there are 210 million buildings in Europe. And if those renovations lead to a 14% reduction, then the reduction for each building is 6 times 14, which is 84% per building. That's a very high ambition, one with which, of course, we agree, but a big, big challenge to the market and to the construction sector. But to get the 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, the 14% reduction in final energy consumption will lead to a higher than 14% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions because of our reliance on fossil fuels, but it won't be 60%. It'll be somewhere in between. And so the balance has got to be achieved by greening supply to buildings. And that has implications for the energy system. There's implications for those technologies and approaches to the envelope. It has implications for control of heating systems and ventilation systems to be sure that energy losses are more controlled, etc. So a challenging time ahead. I've already spoken about the job creation potential, so I won't go back to that. And our view is that the reviews and the changes to the Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive are absolutely required. And we fully agree on the introduction of mandatory energy performance standards and the reform of the energy performance certificate. I just came off a call earlier this morning with the financial sector, where unless the energy performance certificate ecosystem, if you like, is reliable, the confidence of banks and other financial institutions to invest in the building sector is really low. So reforming that energy performance certificate system across member states to make greater comparability possible, to reduce the number of diverging methodologies used, and it's a very technical topic, will be crucially important for building confidence in the renovation wave moving forward. And I've already spoken about expanding action on public buildings. So just turning, and indeed this is quite a lecture, but Vladimir has been very kind to give me plenty of time, so I hope it's not too much so far. Just to move on to talk about financing for 2 or 3 slides, because financing is crucially important. There's no point having these great objectives if we don't give the resources and means to achieve them. And I'm fortunate enough to sit on the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group at EU level, now bringing together more than 300 players, more than half of which are banks and financial institutions, to discuss how to mobilize financing for renovation and energy efficiency in industry and in SMEs. And these slides, these next few slides, come from a presentation that was given to the EFIG, and I hope I can highlight the key elements within the presentation that are of interest right now. One of the first things is, how do you attract private investment and stimulate? The idea is that we need to develop a number of new approaches or encourage existing innovative approaches, and at the same time bring better support and technical assistance to building owners, to public sector owners, so that they can leverage private investment into our sector. So this can happen through aggregators like financial institutions, utilities, which are obliged by the Energy Efficiency Directive to invest in efficiency, and by energy service companies working through energy performance contracting, much used in countries like Croatia, and a model that could be used much more effectively in many other countries moving forward. Then keeping the information flow and the awareness raising in the private sector at a high level through EFIG actions and through the Sustainable Energy Investment Forums, which have been taking place across Europe in the last 3 to 4 years. More than 35 events have been organized, and they continue into the future. Spurring the development of green loans and mortgage financing through, and this is the call I had earlier this morning, but through standards and labels that allow financial products to demonstrate or to be recognized as true green investments, allowing for green bonds to be built, which become commodities that can then be traded, attracting more investors towards our sector. Then supporting de-risking of energy efficiency, because financial sectors have not looked at energy efficiency as an asset class, and they consider it highly risky. But the reality is that the data we hold on energy efficiency investments show that the default rate is 50% of the normal default rate in other investments across society. So in fact, an energy efficiency investment is basically twice as secure as a normal investment. And finally, the European Commission is going to consider introducing a deep renovation standard as part of the new Buildings Directive, and it's developing criteria under the EU taxonomy, which will be the benchmark for defining what constitutes a green investment or not. And once those standards are in place, the banking sector, we hope, will turn towards those standards as the basic standards that they use for investment decisions moving forward. But for financing to work, it needs to be underpinned by increased capacity and technical assistance. And happily, the European Union has a large number of possibilities of support to offer, not only to member states, but actually we've discovered to individual businesses, to individual communities or towns. And that's not captured, it's captured here bottom left. The technical support instrument of the recovery plan is going to be available to anyone who asks for it, who has a viable, what's the right word, investment ready project that they can propose. And also DG Reform, a new department in the European Commission, is providing at no cost to member state authorities or local authorities technical assistance drawn from private consultancy firms, so at zero cost but very high levels of expertise, into helping them develop project proposals or setting up financial schemes. So the classics that are known already are the ELENA model, which is operated by the EIB, and that's for national or regional level. Setting up a network of standardized one-stop shops across Europe, and that can either be set up by public authorities or by private actors getting together. And in Denmark, the Better Homes Initiative is set up by private actors and is having a big impact on the on the residential sector in terms of ambition in renovation works. Then there's the European Smart Cities Marketplace and the EU City Facility, which has been set up to be a direct grant to cities of 60,000 per grant to help cities fund developing local plans and understanding how to activate the market within their local context. So a large range of technical assistance is available. And then turning more towards the actual budget items that are available for the renovation wave. And here I have to say that the amount of money available is very, very high indeed. I'll show an infographic on that later. But it's up to member states in their own planning isn't automatically going to go to member states. So for different categories, for direct investments, the European Union has the Recovery and Resilience Facility. There are elements of the cohesion policy. So first of all, the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, and EU REACT, which is reacting to hardship today caused by COVID. And then the Just Transition Mechanism for heavily fossil fuel dependent regions to help them move out of fossil fuels into more sustainable practices. Then to leverage private investments, you've got the Invest EU, which is the new name for what was called the Juncker Fund, private financing for energy efficiency, and the European Energy Efficiency Fund. Each of these funds tend to provide securitization or guarantees against private investments being deployed into the market. And the average leverage factor looked for among these funds is 12. So if there's 1 billion provided by the European Union, the expectation is that at least 12 billion will be invested in real projects. Under ELENA, which has a similar thing, the average leverage factor for ELENA in the last 6 years is 33, much higher leverage than you are required to get from these particular funds. Then for research and innovation, and I know this seminar is being taken under the flag of a research project, you have Horizon Europe. And I understand that yesterday the regulation establishing Horizon Europe was finally agreed among the European negotiators. So it's coming. And within it, we have some very important platforms that are being built, being prepared. Built for People is going to take over from the European Construction Technology Platform that had the Energy Efficient Buildings Association as part of it. There are going to be European Green Deal dedicated calls to boost our research and innovation towards greener practices. And the Smart Cities Call Continue, which has a big emphasis on integrating physical assets with the energy systems and digitalized approaches to managing energy flows within city networks. Then to address market barriers, you have the LIFE Fund, which is emphasizing clean energy transitions and can actually fund networks or clusters who are working towards an environmental goal, such as reducing energy demand. And these two titles in LIFE of clean energy transition or circular economy and quality of life are the two that are most relevant for the building sector. And finally, and I've mentioned them already, the technical assistance and advisory elements of the ELENA Fund, the technical support instrument, and technical support under cohesion policy call on. But what is that role that member states need to do? Well, for the Recovery and Resilience Facility, member states have a critical role because they must prepare what are known as national recovery and resilience plans. Generally across Europe, those national recovery and resilience plans are being prepared by the Prime Minister's office, and individual ministries are asking for inclusion of various sectors within the national plans. And I'm happy to say that the national partners of the Renovate Europe campaign have been very good at advocating for the inclusion of buildings within the National Recovery and Resilience Plans. And the Commission itself has strongly encouraged through its own guidelines that member states put buildings at the centre of the National Recovery and Resilience Plans. Now, why is this so important? And as you see at the bottom, the formal submission of those plans is open at the present time through to the 30th of April. Why is it important? It's because the money under the Recovery and Resilience Facility must be allocated to real projects, 100% of the money, by 2023. That's a very short time frame in our sector. And what's more important is that all the money must be spent in real projects by 2026. Now, that's unprecedented in European funding terms, that such a short time frame is applied to a major fund. But of course, the point is to soften the economic blow and really help economic recovery. And we believe firmly in the Renovate Europe campaign that the renovation of buildings is the key sector for economic recovery, and that we are hopeful that member states will be putting energy renovation and deep energy renovation into their plans. So pulling all of that together is this info, as you see, shows all of the different funds. So the total amount of money that's now been agreed at European level between the next 7-year budget and the recovery money is 1,850 billion euro. It's a really an unprecedented amount of money. And this diagram, we hope, can help you to understand, first of all, the names of the main funds, which is, so working out from the center, the amount of the main funds, which EU institution is responsible for the fund, so which department do you need to speak to, what member states must do to access the funds, generally preparing plans or agreements or negotiating with the European Commission, and then what we as stakeholders should be aware of that we can do as we try to encourage action at national level moving forward. And one of the key things is to keep the door open with the ministries so that your stakeholder voice is being heard. And at the Renovate Europe steering group meeting just over a week ago, we heard some research that's been carried out by E3G, a think tank, that demonstrates that member states are not consulting stakeholders adequately enough in order to understand what the market will do, how to build support among stakeholder networks for dispersing these huge funds in our societies. So my last slide in the presentation allows me to talk about other factors that I haven't covered in the presentation so far, and that I think might be at front of mind for some of the people on the call. The first thing, and it's on front of mind for me because I spent so many years of my life on construction sites, is the workforce and skills needs to achieve this kind of ambition. So clearly, if we succeed in increasing the activity as we hope to by a factor of 5 or 10, we need simply more workers on building sites. We need more workers in design offices. We need more workers who understand the financing side. We need more workers who can maintain and operate the buildings moving forward. But that can't just be more hands. It must be quality renovation. So that implies higher skills in the workforce. And higher skills is a challenge because in the construction sector, upskilling over time is not something that's really been in the culture of the construction sector, at least not in previous generations. So it's something we must stimulate into the sector moving forward. And I'm happy to say that at least at European representative level, the contractors and the installers organizations are very keen on improving and raising skills among the workforce. And then the simple fact of job creation, in my view, means we should be able to absorb a lot of the unemployment caused by COVID Because let's face it, a lot of hospitality and tourism activities are not going to go back to the levels they were at prior to COVID for a number of years ahead. So why not, as a sector, absorb those unemployed workers who will be looking for meaningful employment and meaningful jobs going forward, in order to address the need for more workers to upscale the amount of renovation taking place. Another factor that I'd like to talk about is, how do we increase the desire among building owners for energy renovation? And obviously the first thing is better communication on the benefits that come in terms of comfort, health, increased value, well-being, so as to help people understand this is not just about reducing your energy bill. This is about giving you a quality of life that's beyond your expectations. But also, from a technical perspective, can we devise approaches that are less disruptive during the works, allowing people to remain in their premises, allowing building to continue, and not having renovation works dragged out over months and months because the sequencing of works was not correct, or because materials weren't ordered in time, or whatever other factors cause works to go on and on. We need to, in the sector, really rethink how we can be sure that we can guarantee lower cost and quicker works on site at higher quality. And that is being rolled out in some industrialized approaches like Energiesprong in the Netherlands, in France, in the United Kingdom. I know it's outside the EU, but still that experience is building at the present time. And then by facilitating the process, taking the burden of planning off people's shoulders through this network of one-stop shops, I think we can increase desire for energy renovation moving forward. And it will be for each country to understand which services are needed within their own one-stop shops. But independence and of the advice is really important to build trust in the community. It's not good to have a one-stop shop that's always promoting the same approach. The approaches must be the right approach for the project in mind. And then let's not forget, there's a big relationship to other initiatives, including the circular economy and the rollout of sustainable materials. So better resource efficiency, reduction of waste, recovery of waste, and reuse of waste in new creative ways as secondary raw materials. All of these topics converge in on the renovation wave. In her presentation of this renovation wave, Ursula von der Leyen said, we don't want to double the renovation wave and as a result double the waste stream from the construction sector. No, we have to think this in a holistic manner. So there are those aspects that are also going to be needed to be considered as we roll out the renovation wave. And finally, I've mentioned it already, there will be an increased use of renewable energy sources in the building sector. We will need to consider how best to integrate those into buildings without making the buildings or the districts ugly with just panels put willy-nilly on buildings. We need to understand that the quality of the built environment is also a visual quality and not just a technical quality. So Vladimir, this is what I had prepared. I can stop here. I would just, on the open discussion slide, promote the fact that the Renovate Europe website contains projects and financing schemes that are considered best practice. We have about 29 on the website, and we're hoping to grow that number over the months and years ahead. So I invite you to explore our website moving forward. So I would now be happy, Vladimir, to take questions if there are any in the audience. I think I was right on time, so my 45 minutes. So over to you to query me. And yeah, just another point to the participants. If there's something else free, if it's about buildings in the European Union and policy, I can probably answer it or direct you to where you get the answer. Vladimir, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian, for this really in-depth presentation of opportunities in this field. we can just say it is really huge opportunity for the sector and for innovation. And it's another stage in our development. So we have to exploit that for sure. I'm asking all the participants to write the questions. I have already one. Can you make me a host back, please?
Yes, I can. Just give me 1 second. I gotta do this. Vladimir, make host. Yes. You should now be host.
Yes, thank you. Here, just a second. So here is the first question I've got on the chat. How to increase innovation, absorption, capacity of building industry? What about industrialization of retrofits?
Yes, so that was from EuroACE. I see it myself. Indeed, the industrialization of retrofits is an area that I think holds great promise, and it has begun to be rolled out in, as I said, the Netherlands, in France, and in the UK. And one of the interesting things about industrialization of retrofits is how it matches and marries with digitalization tools in our sector. And the use of drones for 3D surveying is kind of the starting point, because but that's the starting point, so you can get a very accurate picture of the building. So when I think about industrialization, to date, I've always thought about the kind of industrialization where you build new panels that are, in the end, wrapped around the outside of the building. And in the Energiesprong approach in the Netherlands, that new skin contains the new heating system, the new ventilation system, and the controls for the building. So how do you upscale this? Well, you need a couple of things that would be required to upscale it are really good renovation plans for district level. So you have a large number of buildings that you can tackle at the same moment. Sector first, where they have tried to bundle 100,000 dwellings into a single contract. So you need an economy of scale to make it worthwhile. The second thing, we of operating the new machinery, because after you've carried out the survey on site, you end up having to do what's called mass customization in the factory. So once again, digitalization and robotic construction methods are needed, because having, from a technical perspective, as many of you will know, leaving a gap between the existing skin of the building and a new panel leads to problems of condensation. So you have to have a completely tight fit. So there are a number of new skills that are going to be needed moving forward if we're going to see industrialization. And I think that some of the funding that's out there, InvestEU, should be used to underwrite and take the risk away from companies that wish to move in this direction. But the second thing I wanted to bring up is I've recently come across another approach called Whiskers, which instead of looking at the outside of the building, helps to upscale and simplify the internal insulation for difficult to insulate buildings. So internal wall insulation, which can be so disruptive because of cutting and wet plaster work and so on in the homes. In the Whiskers approach, all of that is digitalized and pre-cut panels are delivered to site that fit together like a jigsaw with no gaps in each room, meaning that a 2-bedroom apartment can be fully internally insulated in 2 or 3 days, and that the people can stay in the building. So there are a number of approaches already out there, and I would just hope that more companies are courageous enough to take this on and begin to industrialize more as we move forward. So I see Rob Kovac has made a comment. Here we're only talking about residential buildings. I believe that progress can be made not only in old buildings, but primarily old energy wasteful buildings. Those, I believe, are not efficient industrial building. So what is the motivation for the industries to make renovations? Is this only in form of carbon tax? Will it be higher, or will there be some more other motivation? Good question. So let me start with what I find easiest to address, a carbon tax. Will there be a carbon tax applied to fossil fuel heating for buildings? We unfortunately think that there will be, and we worry about it. And we worry about that for a number of reasons. Number one, the distributional effect of introducing a carbon tax could be very discriminatory towards the less well-off in society. In other words, increasing energy bills will potentially lead to greater energy poverty and more discomfort in buildings. So that would have to be very carefully looked at. But maybe more importantly, if you have a carbon tax applied for heating and cooling in buildings, then we fear that member states will say that the market is going to make the difference, that the market mechanism of carbon tax will answer the questions. And this is not true, because the elasticity of carbon pricing to motivate energy efficiency actions is very low. What I mean by that is, several studies show that to motivate building owners to undertake energy efficient renovations, the carbon price per ton needs to be around 250 euro. And today the carbon price is 30 euro. So we're out by a factor of 8. So we're not keen on seeing carbon tax on fossil fuels for buildings for those two reasons. But looking at the question, I think it also asks me to address more than just the residential sector. And I know that in the office sector, for example, the use of minimum energy performance standards, where in, again, the Netherlands, it seems I keep coming back to the Netherlands, there's a requirement that by 2023, no office building can be let in the market unless it has an energy label of C or better. And also in the Netherlands, social housing associations have committed to make all of their properties A label by the end of this year. They'll only miss that target by 1 year, but the minimum energy performance standards on commercial buildings in the Netherlands has meant massive renovation programs, and the sector will be ready ahead of time because of the introduction of minimum energy performance standards for letting purposes for those buildings. So there are other motivations that can be used to stimulate renovation of buildings. Yeah, Jure, you're just talking about the fact that according to the renovation wave, the ETS can be used for building retrofit of energy poor households. And indeed, it's something Renovate Europe has been talking about for several years, is that their member states are getting ETS revenues already today, but they're not required to spend all of those revenues for climate-related actions. They're required to use up to 50% for climate-related actions, and they're not reporting how they're using it very well. But you're absolutely right. There's a potentially very large pot of money coming from carbon revenues that we agree with you should be diverted towards building renovation as one of the best sectors. There's an organization called the Regulatory Assistance Project that has carried out research in this area. And they have found that it is 8 times, you get 8 times more carbon savings for your money if you put ETS revenues to building renovation, as opposed to putting ETS revenues towards social tariffs in energy supply side, which is being done by a high number of member states. So a complicated area, but one that we do communicate we ought to use ETS revenues for building renovation. So moving down the list, Vladimir, if I may.
Yes, you please do.
I see Marco has asked a question. Who should be on the front line for analysing all possibilities and financial schemes for funding renovation? Should it be governments, institutions? What can the private sector do? Well, indeed, we think that it's really important to analyse existing financial schemes and possibilities in order to promote the ones that work best. So we by our actions are going to answer that question, because the Renovate Europe campaign office is currently analysing financial schemes as reported by the Joint Research Centre across Europe. And we intend to come out with a kind of sharing of best practice, or an assessment of which ones appear to have the most desirable criteria and the most desirable results. But across, for me though, the people that ought to do that work most rigorously are the EU level institutions who are dispersing the money, so they track how well the money is being invested and whether the money is being invested in a way that achieves the objectives of the European Union. And the second group that ought to be doing it are private think tanks and think-do tanks like the Building Performance Institute Europe, more independent, who can have a colder, more analytical look than maybe even the institutions themselves can do. So actually, Marco, the answer is it's all of us. We all should do it, and we should then cross-fertilize our answers so stakeholders and city authorities can see what are the best schemes moving forward. So Andrei Laurentiu Popescu has some questions. Should I speak them or should I put them in writing? Vladimir, you've put them in writing further down.
Just unmute yourself, Adrian.
Okay.
Andrei. Yeah, okay. Yeah, can you hear me now? It's
yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I asked the first question in writing as well. I was wondering if the renovation wave is dependent on the national recovery plans. Will there be, do you think that might be interruptions on the top bottom implementation, let's say, and decision making, like the money not getting where they should, and but discretionary go somewhere else?
That's a very good question, because the process that's been decided on by the leaders at European level is that the member states produce these national recovery and resilience plans, and then they're submitted to the European Commission that has to assess them and approve them. So how that approval process will go, what criteria are going to be applied, we don't know just yet. But the second thing is that after the Commission have approved them, they must then be approved by the European Council, which means by their peers, by the other member states. And again, I'm unclear on what the criteria are going to be. So first of all, there's a hurdle at the upper level of these approvals that need to be gained before the member state can begin to put the plan themselves into action. And then how they do that in each member state is going to probably rely on existing structures and existing cultures, working down. Let me just imagine that there are managing authorities established for dispersing existing EU funds. Maybe they're going to be charged with the task of now dispersing the recovery funds. Maybe it's going to be a requirement that member states will be asked to establish new routeways, because those established pathways, it becomes very difficult to change the practices of in the minds of the people that have been doing this for a decade or more. And I think the urgency of, first of all, allocating and then dispersing the recovery money will require new methodologies. So I'm afraid, Andrei, I do see a high risk that there's going to be kind of bottlenecks in this top to bottom track as the money filters down. How to avoid it? Boy, I don't have that answer today, but I think as stakeholders, you should, as far as you can, be observing what the member states are putting in place, what checks and balances are going to be proposed in order to be sure that the money really does reach the purpose for which it's intended, and that it does then actually have the beneficial effects we know it can have. I hope that helps. Did you have a second question, Andrea?
Yeah, I had another question, and it's related to something more concrete. For example, if you have, I don't know, a community, a poor community, and the new mayor receives the inheritance from the old mayor with high debts, almost in bankruptcy and in a very bad condition, with energy poverty and a total disaster, and you want to help this community, for example, and you want to say, look, you can go and follow this procedure, it will still be subject to the national plans and how they will be thought. No, it's not something that will be able to be built bottom up as well. For example, a community identifying some, I don't know, problem and wanting to sort it out, it should still be dependent on the top bottom decision, right?
Well, that's another good question. I think yes, that's one route way. But I'm thinking, this is more creative, personal thinking, that why, if such a community exists, and I guess you have a community in mind, what are the factors that led the community to be in debt? Are those factors related to the COVID crisis? Are they related to corruption? What are the factors that have led this community to be in the poor situation it's at? Because then when you understand why it got into that difficult situation, then you can look at the ways out of it. Now, if it's caused by COVID, and that's a possibility, I think it's been going on for so long, I think EuroACE is a fund that could simply cover that debt if the debt is small enough, and put the community back on an even keel, from which they would then have to go through the National Recovery and Resilience Plan process of going bottom up to get the money for the projects they have in mind. But even if the community is in debt through no fault of its own, and there's a new action that it can take that would lead, for example, a community energy project that would lead to the creation of renewable energy sources that could then be sold to begin to create an income stream, and that over time could pay off the debt and create a fund for renovation. This is a mechanism that might be captured under the Recovery and Resilience Plan. And on that front, I'm aware that many energy communities do exist that have used that model across Europe. And there's a very good organization called Res Co-op. That's the name of the organization at EU level. And they represent more than 2,500 such energy communities. So there are mechanisms out there that can be used to alleviate at community level bad debts or bad practices inherited from previous administrations. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adrian. I would also like to have one question for you. We are all aware that nowadays this preparation of national recovery and resilience plans is key thing, which is ongoing. And I would like to know any good practices of engaging the wider professional community and industry representatives and stakeholders in its preparation. In Slovenia, for example, and this refers, I think, to Andrei questions also, it's more like intra-governmental task. It's not that anybody is involved, and what we got through media. Yeah. Even we tried to contact a couple of, let's say, guys there, but well, no response. So is there any mechanism or any good practice to be like presented and say, okay, they're doing it in this way in France? For example, I have here, I don't know if you see it, the figure from the France, how they plan it. And, they clarify that in figures. So it's, something nice to have to also promote the activities in the industry level.
So on the preparation of the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, Well, we at the Renovate Europe campaign asked our national partners to tell us how well they were being consulted for the preparation of those plans. And we were able to prepare a spreadsheet, I think, with about 12 countries that I think you'll have received, Vladimir or Andro, as representatives of our national partner. But the reality is that, in fact, I cannot think of a single country where a proper stakeholder consultation on the national recovery and resilience plans has taken place. And even in countries where the pathways for consultation ahead of a proposal are very good, like my own country in Ireland, they did not have any easy way to make their inputs to the plan in the drafting stage. A number of other countries have prepared the plans in that intra-governmental way you just described, and then submitted the plans, and after submitting the plans have opened a kind of public consultation. And that is another mechanism, because of course the first plan that is submitted is a draft, and the final plan is supposed to be ready by April. So maybe that is a mechanism that could produce some results, but that's only in 1 or 2 countries. And but the country comes to mind, which is Czechia, where our national partner, Chance for Buildings, is frequently contracted by the government to prepare building-related national plans. And in fact, they were contracted to be the authors for the long-term renovation strategy. So maybe that model in Czechia is a model that you could discuss with Peter Holub. I can make the contact if that would be helpful. Because maybe they have a different way of approaching the government that opens the door. And then indeed, as I said, in their case, they've ended up with getting the contract for preparing the long-term renovation strategy. Clearly a step above simple consultation. So I don't know if that's helpful, but Vladimir, I'll recirculate the Excel sheet to you that gives you some indication of the practices in other countries.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's helpful, but we'll see what can be done. Hopefully there will be at least some public discussion on the draft, which is or is going to be produced in these days. So we'll see. We'll try to contact the responsible persons there. They were also invited to this workshop, this webinar, but none attended. So
okay.
We'll see.
That's a shame, because that is a shame. In other countries, the ministry officials are more forthcoming, and I have had similar presentations where government officials were on the call. And indeed, I have one that I'm hoping will be confirmed in January with the Polish ministries. So sometimes they're willing, sometimes they're not. So, but it is our work, I think, as advocates or lobbyists to knock on their doors and let them know we're here. And one other area there is the other lever that you can use, which of course is communications activities. And here in Brussels, social media channels like LinkedIn and Twitter work very, very well for raising the profile of an issue like this, like non-consultation of stakeholders. And I have noticed that in some Central Eastern European countries, many I've had the opportunity to speak on national TV on this issue and advocating for greater stakeholder engagement. So thinking about the media channels might also be fruitful. So that if the ministry doors are closed, to raise a fuss in another way, which would then incite them to open the doors. Maybe. These are just ideas.
Okay, there are no more questions from the audience. I have another one, maybe your perception on how the cluster can be helpful in this let's say, huge opportunity. For us, it's clear, and when looking and reading and going through the presentation you prepared, I have seen a lot of activities, role services which can be provided by clusters in regard the financing, in regard the promotion, in regard the skills development. But this is again something to be financed somehow as intermediate organization. You know, this is not something which needs just goodwill, but it needs also some assistance. So can this somehow be part of technical assistance or related to technical assistance? If there is some options to get some financing for this kind of activities of the clusters?
So the answer to that question is yes. There should, I believe, be direct financing available in various formats. You already know of one potential financing route, which is to engage in research projects that are pertinent to your work, and that by having that the research project approved, it finances a stream of action that you intended to undertake anyway. But I think, secondly, now with the need for economic recovery and the focus on renovation, funding like LIFE ought to be directly available as a grant to help organizations like your cluster to really develop those service offers into the sector for the Slovenian context. Also, I think EuroACE might well be a funding source that you could look at. And for sure, you could have a conversation with DG Reform to see if they can assign to you a technical assistance paid for entirely by them that would take the burden of some of that organizational work off your shoulders. And I think for accessing DG Reform, you might have to go through your national contact point. And I don't know who that is in each country. And there's always a national contact point through which you as stakeholders would need to go to access the European Union funding. I mean, we know then for the cohesion funds, for example, it's the managing authorities. So going back and talking to those agencies that are the national contact points for various funds, and simply asking the question, can we as a cluster get direct funding for some of our activities, is something I would advise you to do. But as I say, I don't hold in my mind the names of all the different organizations for all the countries. But if you have difficulty, come back to me and I'll see if I can point you in the right direction. But the other thing that you should have actually in Slovenia is there should be a national office of the European Union or the European Commission, where there are advisors sitting there in your capital city that can actually answer these questions for you. So do think to knock on their door as well, because there are representative offices of the European Commission in every member state, and they're there for you as stakeholders and citizens to go and get help. So yeah, I think they're the areas I would point you towards, Vladimir.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we will go for all of those. We have the national office, of course, of European Commission in Slovenia. So just pick the right person and we will go there for sure.
Yeah.
There are no more questions from the audience. We have to conclude this webinar. So just a second, I prepare some text. I think we should stress again that the Renovation Way is a huge opportunity for the sector, as it was put forward in the European agenda, as the politicians became aware of its importance in the mitigation of climate change, circular economy, employment, as was stressed today, reemployment of unemployed currently from tourist sector, for example, resilience of the economy, and more to list. Probably there are more things to mention. And there is really an important funding opportunity or opportunities which are clearly related or noted in regard the building sector, renovation, and so on and so forth. It's not like one of the domains. It's one particular domain, one of 7. So this should be, I think, kept in mind. And it will increase also the scope of different actors from the profession being involved in renovation, because if we go to deep renovation, you need actually architects, planners, all kind of experts to deal with that, and also outputs from the research and development, novel technologies you just mentioned for the inner insulation and so forth. So this is really, really huge opportunity also to implement some of the outcomes of research development projects, which are there in the deliverables, but not put to market. So I think we should all work on that and stay tuned and work together to exploit that opportunity. So this is my invitation to all of you to stay online with us, connected, and we are working in this way also with other webinars. The second one is about cybersecurity. Digitalization is one of the aspects which is needed, but then it comes also to digital security issues. So this webinar is about that, and that is a special webinar, how to sell the companies, which is also something novel to maybe our organization, because there are other competencies which are needed in these new businesses which are going to be developed within the retrofitting and dealing with the finance investors and so on, which is really, really huge opportunity for all of us. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Adrian, for this really important presentation. We will use it a lot, I promise. many like starting points are there which we can work on at the cluster. So thank you very much. And please follow us on LinkedIn and social media, and also the Renovation Wave, as they're really doing a great job in the field. Thank you also for that in the name of our cluster and stakeholders from Slovenia, let's say, in the building sector. So thank you all, and see you at the next opportunity.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone, and thanks for your attention. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.